Welcome, Jesse, and
Thank
it's
you.
really great to have you for an hour talking about your live recipe, which is actually live right now, reframing the narrative. And it's obviously, and for many reasons, an extremely pertinent topic that is crucial and critical for the South African milieu and our zeitgeist right now. I think there's a
Sure.
lot going on, and I think your particular theme and way and modus operandi is a tonic in these difficult times. I mean, I think one of the things that I was reflecting upon in preparation for this discussion this morning when I opened up, I'm a subscriber to News 24. Not 100% sure why I still subscribe because it just puts me in a bad mood every time. I
Sure.
saw the opening news was, something about the head of police who had
Yes.
stolen a whole lot of money, and then there was some crime that was going on in the Cape Flats, and it was just
Impressive
crazy. I
stuff
mean,
here.
there was just like a bullet point after bullet point after bullet point of really, terrible stuff going on. And so the story of South Africa at the moment, both locally and internationally, I mean, I've just come back from Europe from a 2-week trip. Everybody's asking me like, cheapers, like
What's happening
your
down there?
what's happening? What's going on? People are being shot in their farms, and
Yeah.
there's this. Everybody's talking about the youth unemployment, and
Sure.
we're top of so many rankings,
Yes.
and there's a few that are good. For example, I think Cape Town just won the best bucket list destination for I think the 9th year of 10 years running, and most of them are bad. Most of the stories are not good stories.
Sure.
So this hour we want to talk about reframing the narrative.
Yes.
And so I want to just, as a starting point, can you explain to us how your life's purpose, this idea of storytelling and storytelling in a way that has impact,
Sure.
came to be, and why is it something that is such a big calling for you, Jesse?
Cool. Greetings, everybody, and thanks, Fred. I almost said, "Welcome to the show."
You can, brother. This is your hour.
No, I think for me, where it started, I think I've always been a storyteller. And interesting that you brought up your childhood memory of going to a band section where you read stuff. So me, when I was growing up, I had a similar sort of, because I always loved art. I always loved expressing myself, but it's a thing that I always got into trouble for. So in my primary years, I remember I used to jump into like empty trash like dustbins, right? I'll find a big enough dustbin and hide in there, and then I'll draw on myself and do my drawings, and then watch out whenever I get a free time, and then I'll get out, right? I get out, but then these are things that I was doing secret because I used to get into trouble for that. But then later, when I get home, when it's bath time, there will be these things on my body. Then I'll be, So I think for me, the love to do what you want to do in the world that doesn't understand it and appreciate it, it's what actually propels and pushes it, right? And then also, so many times we have those tell somebody moments. But what happens when you live in a world that doesn't have that for you, right? So you crawl back into your private spot and then start telling your story, start doing, but you are telling it to yourself. So the only audience there you have is yourself. But I think for me, that's what that was the narrative that I grew up with. But then in my teens, when I started meeting sort of people that had a similar experiences, right? And then I was like, look at this. And the things that have happened, I was like, oh, so I'm not the only one. There's other people that are actually going through stuff. But one thing I noted, they're also not documenting, they're not expressing it in their work or whatever, right? And then So for me, that was my share. Finally, I found a crowd that I could share my things. And I remember the people that I used to hang around with at that time, they would look at my work like, dude, are you having nightmares? Because at that time. And then I was like, I never looked at my work that way. And they were like, dude, what is the stuff that you are drawing? Are you having nightmares? Is your life okay?
It's incredible because your work is so good, and I have to tell you, I mean, I've been a fan of yours for the last couple of years, because I don't know if you remember when we first met. We met at Workshop 17, and
Yes,
I was kind of,
remember.
I float in and out of that, that big glass box where everybody works, and the hot desking and
Yes,
whatnot. And you were sitting there and you had some of your drawings out. And I
yes,
couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how good they were. I was like, holy crap, this guy's proper talented. And then you and I started talking, and we
so,
had a conversation, and you told me about some of the work that you're doing.
yes,
And it feels like that, that spirit of shaking the tree. I think we
yes,
have that you and I have that in common. I mean, also at school, I was always in trouble for all kinds of things. And something that you just said now, I think is really interesting. When I was at school, I felt like an outcast. I
yes.
had some friends, but I didn't feel like I was part of the system, and that I didn't
Mm,
really fit in. So I also drew cartoonists. People to this day ask me about my cartoons that I used to draw of teachers. I used to get in trouble, all the time. There was something around this idea of tribe, and you mentioned tribe now. There's, I didn't feel like I was part of the tribe, the school
yes,
tribe.
yeah,
When I left school, I went to a design school. I went
sure,
to the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, and had a really good, it was Cape Tech back then, and it had a
sure.
really good design school. The important thing for me was that I found my tribe. And there were people there who were willing to listen to my story and to share those stories. And I think there's something around the storytelling. How important is it to be part of a community and to find a community in order to establish your storytelling, the narrative that you're trying to convey?
In my context, I would use my background. I think when I came into, especially discovering that this talent that I have is design or is graphic, I come from a background where I didn't actually speak a word of English. I didn't even understand English, right? And then I was just an artist selling my artwork on the side of the road, and the people that were buying my work, they would have this comments, "Wow, this is so graphic, this is so beautiful." And at that time, I was like, "Whatever, man." I thought graphic meant, "Yo, we love it. So okay, buy and get it, buy and buy. I just want to make a sale, make a sale." But I think they said it long enough until it started catching my attention. And when it caught my attention was I was at Artist Proof Studio. I was doing printmaking, and then I just done some prints. And then I heard when they were reviewing in the crit session, reviewing my work, and they were like, "Yo, this is so graphic." I'm like, yeah, graphic. What is this? And then through Artist Proof Studio, I got introduced to another industrial printing, which is now that does all your billboards, your basically all the different from books to stuff. And then that really opened my world, because in those sessions, you start now seeing people that are doing things that you inherently had, but you didn't know what they were described as or what they were called, right? And then for me, I know what this thing, I call it in my own language, or what I call it in my own way, but I didn't understand the vocab, So as we would say in the township, the English data bundles, they were 0 to none. I didn't have I didn't have, yeah, those bundles were like, yeah, not existing, And so for me, I struggled a lot to even, and then that made me in a way a loner, because I remember when I got to AAA, I remember it was like my first experience being in a mixed multiracial space for the first time. I was like, how old? I was like 24. I was 24, and I'm like, and number one, I'm the odd one out there because of my skin, obviously, and then my age. I was the oldest one there. And then all the kids that were there, they were like 16, 17. And then I was like So like, dude, when did you find out about this thing? What are you doing here? And this is a place for, and then I think that really shook me, right? And started making me understand that, you know what? And funny, I went to AAA, which is known for, it's a school of advertising, right? But I came out of there as a designer, and I came out of there as an illustrator and a designer, and I was commended for that. And then me questioning that and analyzing that, like, why did I go through that experience? And I remember that, okay, I'm going to a communications academy space, right? And then that really actually helped me to realize that actually this thing that I'm doing is actually a language, right? So, but that language speaks differently and has different interpretations in different worlds. And so knowing yourself, finding your identity, and then finding that tribe or finding that space of expression, and also speaks about the value of belonging, because then you start finding like, oh, this thing that I have is actually this, because then you start not only appreciating, but you're getting to understand what is it that you have in your hands, right? Because then you go like, oh, because then when you start understanding that which you have in your hands, then you start having appreciation for it, right? And then it turns you into a student again. So you become the student of what you have in your hands. You know what I mean? So with that, humility then becomes like second nature. No one has to teach you that, because you're like, yo, this thing, and then now you start conversing in the language that you always had, but you didn't know how to express it, or what it's called in different worlds. So I think having that world helps you to find that, oh, I can communicate this way, not this way. So just one more thing, funny thing that happened during my time there was I didn't understand English. So you know what I used to do? Remember those VHS tape cassette? So I'll record everything on SABC3 because it was English content. And then I'll listen and have a dictionary, and then just to teach myself English. And then when I go back to school, and then I'll have those conversations. And then I remember this guy laughed at me. He's like, yo, dude, you speak like a chick. I'm like, what do you mean I speak like a chick? And then I went back and reviewed my content. So all my content was chick flicks, bro. Your Ellie McBeal, yo. I'm like, oh, man, look at this,
That's amazing.
And then I started looking for guy content, and I recorded that. And then I started realizing, oh, there's a dialect that, this is not just, So I think that helps you to find, you connect, you speak, you learn. So the value of finding a tribe and finding a belonging, it helps you to establish yourself and be awakened to who you are.
It's so extraordinary to me to hear your journey, because we didn't touch upon that in the discussions that we had in recording the course and so on. What strikes me immediately is that there is almost like a lean startup methodology to the way you have navigated the world, even as a kid. You tried something and you failed, and you learned from the failure, and then you tried again, and then you course corrected, and you added different elements each time as you went forward and took new steps. And I'm interested, we didn't ask this in the recipe, but I'd love to know, your artwork is so extraordinarily good. It reminds me of, the great graphic artists of the 60s, like Robert Crumb, and, closer to home, Anton Kahneman and Conrad Boertes, who were fine artists. These people, even though they drew cartoons and comics that became world famous, and if you get an original, they're worth like, millions nowadays. You just seem to have, you as we discussed just before this session started, you had never heard of these people.
Yes.
And so somehow or another, you stumbled into this style, this graphic style that has obviously propelled you forward in a fairly remarkable career. Jesse, how did you learn? How did you learn how to draw like that? How to create art like that? Where did that come from?
I think, failure is a very good and bad teacher in a way, right? So it can leave good dents on you, and can also leave the negative ones, right? And for me, I struggled a lot with rejection, because when you're coming from a background and a community doesn't understand you, right? So you're always not sure that is this thing gonna work? Is this thing gonna work? Is this thing gonna work? So it became like a subconscious thing, right? That just works automatically without me knowing. So it became this companion with me. But I wish I realized later that, oh, look, I've grown this friend that actually is actually sabotaging me as well. So so I think for me, the failure was I would get excited in discovering this new style or new way of doing something, but the excitement will end right there, right? After I've created it, and then the tell somebody moment, I was not looking forward to it, you know? And then later I started analyzing, like, where does it come from? It's like, oh, look, I've recorded that thing and I've made it a permanent feature in who I am. Like, it's like I will do this thing and then so it always had that this is not good enough. Do more. This is not gonna work here. So in a way, I'll be like, I think what some people will call it like a imposter syndrome, but I think imposter syndrome is just a light way of putting it, but this goes deeper than that, because in my sessions, in the tracing your smiley heart, I go like, trace the enemies of your smiley heart. Like, what are the things? Why do you hate the things you hate? Why do you love the things you love? You were not born like that. You picked it up somewhere, right? So for me, this became then an encourager, like, oh, you know what, for me to be better, I need to actually do something else that people are not doing, and then in that environment that I was at, especially even like coming to like I'm learning English, and it's already a competitive space, right? And I don't understand what is healthy competition and unhealthy competition. All I know is I'm an outsider and I gotta do my best, to make it in here. But in there, those little, like I'm saying, failures got little like negative and positive, but I leaned more on the negative, right? Because of this issue that I had of dealing with the spirit of rejection, right? But then later I realized that no, man, I'm enough, but the false false messenger, or I'll say like an evangelist, which is the rejection. It was saying to me, whatever you're doing is not good enough. You don't belong here. You are not enough. You're not. So you have to keep doing, keep doing, keep doing. So not realizing that, that the positive side, on the flip side, what it was doing actually, it was keeping me to, or pushing me rather, to do more things, do more, do more, do more. So that became my learning path. So I would not stick to one style. I would go like, oh, I've mastered this style. Okay, let me go to another style. Let me go to another style. So because I know tomorrow somebody else is gonna come up with some sort of, you don't belong here, whatever. Or when that thing comes, like, look. So I always like arm myself with something, right, as a backup. Like, oh, look, I've done more. If you don't want this, there's that,
Yeah.
And also coming from the streets, like by selling, when you're a vendor, if you see those guys at the robots, they never sell one thing, right? They look at what's selling. If it's not selling, they chuck it away and bring in another one. So that as well, I brought it like, okay, this is not in. Okay, let me put it back in the pocket. Let me pull this out. So you always have to have something, because never go home without a sale. So,
Yeah,
so
there's something that I again, there's something so important about there's this spirit of I guess showing up, speaking up, showing your work, learning from the responses, and this, I mean, there's an extraordinary courage that's required from all of us to be able to do that, and to be able to in psychological terms they would call it shadow work. I love the fact that even though you have Smiley Heart's agency and you have these very positive messages, it's not, sometimes one would call it toxic positivity, where everything needs to be positive. You acknowledge the fact that some rejection, some of those dents are really painful, and those are valid. It's important to understand, and there's elements about ourselves that we need to acknowledge that are the parts that we suppress, hide, or deny. And it's not all good news all the time, because we can't have the good news without acknowledging the bad news, right? Because otherwise everything just cancels each other out.
Yes.
There's something that I wanted to mention, and I've been thinking about it, and I see there's a question as well from the audience. And by the way, we'll get to as many questions as we can. So if anyone has a question, just pop it in the messages, and we'll we'll put it to Jesse. In the conversation that we had in the studio, Jesse, you mentioned something that has stuck with me ever since that day, which was essentially, it was a Zulu saying that you know, and talking of speaking
yes,
up,
yes,
of a child who doesn't cry at the breast will die. And
yes,
it was such an impactful thing. And it's so laid in meaning. And
yes.
if can you tell us that saying, and
Yeah.
why is it important in terms of this context of reframing and conveying a narrative?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that it says ingane engakhali ifele embelekweni. So embelekweni it also means like what, the cradle, like, you know, when you're given birth and then you don't cry, and then, you know, so for me the significance of that is that if you don't shout out, no one's gonna know, right? You know, so if I allow you to do something that I don't appreciate, that I don't like today and tomorrow and da 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 da, and then one day I'm like, you know what, this Fred, you know, and then on that day I punch you, and you're gonna be surprised, and then rightfully so, you're gonna be surprised, like, oh, dude, I've been hitting you like this whole 5 years, 15 years, or whatever. And then today, you know, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, you were supposed to know this. And you know, so I think so just coming from that pure sort of space in terms of you need to always express, right? When you are not comfortable about stuff, or when things are not going your way. But now let's flip it now to the positive. The positive is that the world. I remember when I was in one of the books I bought in London at the Tate Museum during my visit for the 100% Design. It was Life is a Pitch. That book was such an amazing. I just forgot the author, but it says life is a pitch. So every day you have to show up. You know, you have to pitch, you have to convince, you have to. So it speaks directly to this saying, like, you know what? If you're not gonna show up, if you're not gonna pitch yourself, you know, man, who's gonna buy into you? Who's gonna know what you're doing, right? So you always have to dust yourself up, and then as you're doing that, your shortcomings are gonna be so evident. Your weaknesses are gonna be the first things that are out there, right? But imagine you have a glass full of dirty water, and then you pour clean water into it. Obviously, that the first stuff that's gonna bubble up is what? Is all that gunk, right? All that gunk. Eventually, but if you keep pouring, keep pouring, the glass is going to be clearer, the water is going to be now attractive, and then it's going to be, you know what I mean? So so the positive in that, you know, so you have to keep going, keep saying, like, ish, you know, because the thing is, you go back home without anything, you're like, ish, yeah, I'm dying here, I know I have to come back again, it doesn't matter what. And I think for me, I also looked at, you know, that whole thing that I'm the oldest, and time has left me. It means that there's 15-year-olds who are way advanced than me, and I don't have time on my side, so I have to like pack. So that also was like, but it was fear based as well. So it was wrong. It was wrong, but right. It helped. It was fear based sort of motivation that made me to do that stuff, right? So I think, to answer your question in that way, is that a cry comes as an unfolder of a lot of things that are hidden from where that sound is coming from, right? So because it's just like, it's an alarm, like, where is that sound coming from? When you look that way, you discover a whole lot of things there, right, that made that sound. Yeah.
I mean, it's good relationship advice, it's good business partner advice, it's good team advice. I guess it's a perspective for anything, you know. If something is upsetting you, it needs to be said, and if something is bubbling up from inside, it needs to come out, because otherwise it just becomes suppressed. And then when it does come out, it comes out in a way that's not necessarily very helpful.
Exactly.
And so there's two questions from Carmen. I really like the second question here, which kind of relates to some of the things you've already said in terms of, you know, if people have already made up their minds about you and your business, and you know that speaks to a lot of us. You know,
Yes.
we come in and perception is reality. You know, people have these perceptions of us based on things that potentially we don't really have any control over. How do we reframe that narrative? How do we change that perception?
For me, I think during my prayer time, I think throughout this conversation you hear, like I always resort to that, because when things don't go my way, I go back there. And I remember during my prayer time, the Holy Spirit said to me, I was dealing with the same thing. I was like, yo, man, people don't want to hear my story. These people are jealous of me. Like, it looks like they've made up their mind about me. Look, I don't belong here. And, and then the voice asked me, like, what's the world population? And then I started like, yo, there's billions of people around the world, right? And the founder of what's this, Alibaba also touched on that. He says, if you have internet, hey, you stop thinking about where you stay. Stop thinking about where you are. Think about the world. You got access to the world. So for me, when that is like, so there's so many billions of people in the world, but you're worried about the 7 people that are not buying your stuff, that are not interested in you. The 7 people, but you haven't met the other billions of the people around the world who are waiting for this amazing gift that you are, right? So this just tells you that don't hate them or draw a negative conclusion around them, because remember, at one point they were attractive to you. At one point you were happening, right? But there comes a time when you outgrow that space. So maybe it's a sign for you to go to spread your wings to other things, right? And go to other new experiences. Because remember, dreams and gifts that we have, they are unfolding. They're like an onion, right? So you just one layer. So there's other layers about yourself that you haven't discovered, and so now so that discomfort, that thinking that, oh, those people are they whatever. No, it's them saying, like, you know what, it's time to leave this pot plant and go plant it somewhere else or grow, because a plant can't stay in one pot plant. So for me, I look at it that way, because then that allows you then to have I'll say, we always hear people say be sober in mind, right? But I'm more of a both, not sober in mind, but also sober in heart. Because if your heart is sober, you don't hold on to wrong conclusions about whatever is happening at that time. Because life is very tricky. There's a song Brenda Fassie, the late Brenda Fassie wrote, that says, "Ivililajiga." So it says the will change, right? Today is you who's happening, but tomorrow is going to be, it might be me. Then what then? And so now what it says, like, the little person or whatever negative conclusion you have about that particular person today, tomorrow instances might change, tables might turn. You might be in a compromised situation or in a, so if you let you, so you don't know what the future holds. You don't know why purpose has brought you guys together, so it might not make sense today, but maybe in 5 years time, it will start making sense.
There's something that I'm noticing as a theme with all of the work that you do, and the way you approach life. There is a constant sense of movement, of course correcting, and learning from mistakes, learning from when you hit a brick wall, learning from the feedback, whether positive or negative, and that you use as grist for the mill to continue and to make the 1 degree of change that's required tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And exactly. As Brenda Fassie says, the world turns and the world is changing. And I love that. I mean, you've given us glimpses of it, that that there is also a very contemplative and meditative side to you, that it's not just about movement. There is also a part of you that goes back into a private space, and you pray to your God, and there's a sort of reflective side to it as well. And I really like that balance. I think that's important for all of us to, there's a trap on the entrepreneurial space, and certainly that I feel often, in that I I am guilty of this continual movement. All the time. I'm just moving. And I think one of the things that I've had to force myself over the past, say, 10 years or so, is to try and make space every day for some meditative processing of what is happening in my life, to be reflective and to lean into that.
Sure.
And I mean, I want to just touch upon the work that you do and how it can be applied to the entrepreneurial space. And first of all, I mean, what prompted you? Was there something, that specifically prompted you to start the Smiley Heart Agency? And what is the Smiley Heart Agency? I mean, what is it that it does?
So in the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the news, the bad news that's happening around, right? And depression about our country and like, what's happening in South Africa? So a lot of negative and bad vibes that are happening. And so for me, what started this was around the same time when the fees must fall, this must fall, that must fall, this must go, everything. I'm leaving South Africa. So there was so much of that. But at that very same time, my wife and I, we struggled with childbearing. So we had about 4 miscarriages and 1 stillbirth. So the 5th loss for us was an actual, now, because remember, some of them, the miscarriages, you don't get to see because they've got a medical disposal sort of way of it. But this particular one, it was actually a stillbirth. And then I remember just walking out of the grave, because carrying a little casket, going into there, dropping, putting it in, and then covering the hole. And then coming out of there, I didn't want to work anymore. I didn't enjoy what I was doing, and like my wife as well, and I was like, what, I don't want to do anything of this. And then I went to this orphanage, where that place for me gave me it sort of quenched that desire to be a parent, to be a father, because you go to an orphanage where there's a lot of orphans who are dying to have that experience. And then whilst I was there, I remember one Sunday I visited a church, and then the minister was talking about, we pray for ourselves, we pray for everything to go well for ourselves. There are all these unions out there that are trying to make the world a better place and stuff. But when last did you pray for your country? How is your country better because of you? How is the world? When last? And then that really stuck with me. And so it's rightfully, though, I'm selfishly looking for my peace, right? But that spoke purpose to me. It's like, dude, you're not just existing. You're here for a particular reason. And every home deserves a smiley heart. And then for me, right there, because I'm a visual person, so I was like, thinking in pieces, like, and then I started imagining, like, imagine walls of hope. Imagine if I could do, and for the sake of basically helping everyone find their smiley heart. And then from there, I started doing these little what do you call it, selfie stick sort of portraits of with a message that's written, I'm a South Africanist and I'm doing this for SA. And then that question is a question that I took to the streets, and then I basically posed, stopped people, because the design was nice. They're like, oh, do you want to take a photo? They'll take a photo, and then I'll get them to read. And then as they were reading this, they would go like, I'm a South Africanist and I'm doing this for SA. So then there'll be a conversation starts. I was like, what are you doing for SA? What are you doing for SA? And then the conversations and some of the powerful sort of things that came out of those conversations really made me think about, I need to make this thing an official thing, not just the cool take pictures on the streets, right? So then I started pushing, like, what? I'm a South Africanist. I'm the reason the world has a smiley heart. I'm the South Africanist. Will you be that? How are you going to be it? So let's start having this conversation. And that became then the catalyst of basically starting that, right? But not knowing that where it's going to go. And you talk about learning from experiences and adapting. At that time, I had my creative agency that I called Taste My Waffle. And so Taste My Waffle was doing fairly well. But I remember this at that particular time. So that was a very learning period for me. One of my clients kept on, all my emails that I sent to them kept on bouncing. And then one day we were in a board room meeting, and then they called in the IT guy to go like, dude, we're not getting this guy's email. Why? And then like, oh no, they're in the spam, in the porn red, you know. So what he says is that the company thinks I'm a porn website because of the name, right? But I've been their service provider for years, and it's like, yo, I'm ish. This name, I like this name, but ish, this name is not make sure. You know, and then I had to like, yeah, this is a sign I'm dumping this name as well. I'm losing this name. Like, just here I am. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm a cool kid doing my thing. Yet I have this image and the reflection that, you know, a perception that's I don't like. So I'm gonna just
That's amazing.
Yeah, let's just get rid of that. Let's focus on this and find a palatable thing, you know, but not lose my purpose. But I'm not gonna lose my my sleep over this. You know, it's a clear thing. Let me just dump it because it's not challenging what I'm doing because I've been serving them for that long. So, but the only thing that was wrong was the name, right? So that,
Well, it speaks to, there's something, I mean, it's like you can basically read the label on the bottle and you
yes,
know what's in it, right? Smiley Heart
yes,
Agency, and it pretty much immediately conveys who you are, your spirit, and the impact that you're trying to make. Which I think it's such a lovely name, and it's such an awesome reflection of, or an outpouring of your character and your personality, Jesse.
sure.
And I think the work that you do is quite expansive and quite impactful. And there's another question from Carmen here in terms of, I mean, you obviously have the skill of being able to, to create a logo and to create these beautiful visuals and all that sort of thing. But we're talking about narrative here. So Carmen's question, I think, is great. Can you rewrite your business narrative without rebranding everything, like the logo, the visuals, and so on? Like in your view, Jesse, where should that change start?
So just to backtrack a little bit on why the South African and Smiley Heart work exists, right? Life is full of challenges. The way we framed work, business. We said business exists to solve a problem, right? So every time we're looking at things, we go like, this is a problem. You know, I'm here to fix this problem, that problem, right? But somehow that wording and the naming of it, it's got some sort of heavy thing around it. But if you look at how the use of challenge and even how social media has grew based on that, here's a challenge, do this challenge, do this challenge, do this challenge. So the challenge in a way, it's an invite. It invites you to come, you know what, let me come and do something. So I've made it part of my framework where it says challenge, using your smiley heart to have impact. So what is your smiley heart? So your smiley heart is your purpose, your talent, and your creativity. So what it says, it's got a lighter and an inviting way, but it's not denying the fact that something is inherently wrong with what you're facing, but there's something in you that can turn this and flip this around. So coming now to the branding question is that branding, let's remember, branding is not logo. Your logo is not your brand, right? The designs, but your story is your brand, and who you are is your brand. So, and who you are, I always like to use this example of Disney. Disney has got a lot of catalog in their stuff, right? But they don't tell the same story all the time. They've got different stories. There's this, there's that, there's that. But you know, oh, this is a Disney type of story, you know, or that's not a Disney story. That's the Warner Bros. Type of story, right? But they've got a myriad of things, right? So with yourself as well, you are here on earth. You remember your talent and everything is still unfolding, and so don't box yourself in who you were today. You know, it's a seed. You plant a seed, it transforms, it becomes a plant, it becomes this, and then it bears fruit. You know, so when you look at the fruit and you look at the seed, there's no, you can't connect them. You know, kind of like, is this you? Is it you? You know, so when you look at a butterfly, you look at a caterpillar. There's a lot of things that happen, uncomfortable and breaking and things like that. So life is gonna bring those things. So we shouldn't be surprised when those things happen, but we should be actually be ready to adapt, because we should know what are those signs. Or when this thing starts happening, it's a sign for this. When this, because remember, you have to make the decision. So rebranding yourself, and you're thinking, Ish, I don't have a logo, I don't have this. And I think there's another question also from comments, like, if you don't have a big budget. I'm like, I just started, we just cardboard. I cutted the cardboard, but the cardboard was just my way of conversation, a conversation starter. But I had a dream in me, like, what is that dream, right? I'm going to keep pushing, and that kept on leading me to different things. So when I look at what I started with and with what I have now, I still have, I wish I had like 10 billion. I could do lots. I wish I had lots, but it's never about the budget, but it's about your journey and your story and what it unearths everywhere around you, because you are an unearther of something, right? So wherever you go, it's going to come up. You're going to wake up certain things. You're going to wake up certain things, but you have to be a student of your vision, in that way. Because then you start to realize, like, oh, this brand keeps doing this. Because I mean, like, so then from there, find yourself a mentor. A friend of mine once said, success leaves a lot of hints. It leaves a lot of hints. So if you find there's things that are working and they've been working for years, so there's a reason why those things have been working, and what are those things? And so for me, I've learned that building, you can't build based on cool. There's always going to be an opportunity. This is what my mentor also said. There's always going to be plenty of opportunity to do your cool stuff, right? But building requires something deeper than that. So that's basically that. So this invites you then into that deeper learning. So you find yourself a mentor, connect yourself to a circle of learning, and then like, just be a student of your vision. So that
There's
you can
something interesting around this idea of budgets, and the requirement of budget to be able to do anything. And whilst that is obviously true, there's oxygen that's required for a business, and cash provides that oxygen. I think there's a weird counterintuitive trap that certainly we've seen at Heavy Chef, and I've read about. I mean, there's a Scandinavian economist, a guy called, I think his name is Johan Norberg, and he wrote a book around economics and startups. And there's a well-known research project that they did around the startups that were given grant funding by I think it was the Swedish government, versus the ones that had to bootstrap and actually do it as you talk about, like every day, cut out in cardboard, try, learn, fail, iterate, try again, and continually take the data, and every day provides another step. Versus the ones that were given grant funding that was basically like free money in order to do the things that they wanted to do. There was something like an 85% failure rate in those startups that were given the money versus the ones that had to bootstrap and be conscious and mindful about the money that they were spending. So there's something really interesting about the psychology behind that. There is an attention to detail, the minutiae of the data. That's what is being received when one is much more intentional about how one spends the money. So I love what you're saying there. I would love to have billions too, but it actually doesn't necessarily, and in fact it very often does not equate to a successful business and a successful fruition of one's idea. And and I mean, obviously, okay, so we're talking about the reframing of the story, and I think one of the things is, we can reframe our own narratives, and we can take it, as you have alluded to, in this day by day continual learning, exercise, and trying things and being iterative and taking the feedback and pouring more water into the glass. And, I think that's such a lovely analogy. What about some of the things, I mean, in South Africa, and you talk about being a South Africanist, and I'm going to hit you with quite a hard question, Jesse, but I want us to try and grapple with this, because it's something that I think about a lot. And in our community, we see a lot of, our society is beset with problems, with crime, corruption. We have, just layers of systemic issues, from energy to water, and our proximity to markets in the wealthy nations around the world is we're very far from everybody. So Jack Ma from Alibaba, he's right, we have a global audience, but we're far. We're positioned in the furthest of Africa. So and in particular, things like we have in these lists that we mentioned in the beginning of the session, we're number one. We're the worst unemployment rates in the world. We've got the highest youth unemployment, sitting at something like between 50 and 65%, depending on who you believe, in terms of 18 to 24 unemployment. How do we reframe that narrative? What are the steps that we need to take as a society? I mean, obviously we can be meditative, but are there action steps?
Practical things.
Yeah.
I think for me, I would just go to the obvious pain point, which is around crime. For me, the reason I'm choosing that is that last year, if last year had its way, you wouldn't be speaking to me today. I would be gone. I was like almost taken out. My life was, and it was an attempted hijacking and robbery. I was coming back from a Smiley Heart session in one of the locations around here in Cape Town, and then the guys followed me. And then because they saw what was in my van, they're like, "Oh, that branded van has got stuff in there." They wanted the stuff in there. And they managed to mess me up big time. And I remember waking up in hospital, brain injury, and now I couldn't do anything. Machines around, and then you're doing CAT scans. They tell you like there's a bleed in your brain. You can't stand, you can't do this. Now you have to stay away from this. Basically, stay away from the things that you were doing. And I remember I couldn't even draw, which is my my vehicle, my tool,
your happy place.
My happy space. I couldn't do that anymore, and that brought about a lot of frustration and anger inside me. And just from an act of crime, that crime basically took away from my family, took away from me, took away from basically everything, right? So the impact of that, they're very for me. I'll speak from that, because I'll see that is that it looks like life has to throw you in the darkness first, and then when light enters that space, then you start understanding what light you have to be. So I looked at the attackers. They were fairly young, and I looked at them. They were like, man, I mean, these kids could be, at school, or they should be in varsity or doing something, but they're doing this, and they almost took my life. And then that really pierced my heart, because I also have a son in the similar age group, and I'm like, shoo. So is this how desperate things are, for these young people? And so then I started opening my understanding of how much, like, what does a smiley heart really mean? It's not about just happiness, So we say every home deserves a smiley heart, So every parent would like to see their child turning into something, becoming somebody better in life. So now the Smiley Heart workshops then inspired me to go back into the townships and into those spaces where finding your identity, finding your talent, and finding who you really are is really, really important. Like, oh, this is who I am. And then how can you use your Smiley Heart to better yourself, And so finding the young people who are in a space of despondency, but how do we move them from there to the latter, right? So I went in there looking for creatives to recruit them or to find opportunities for them in the creative sector. But this particular incident woke me up to a bigger issue, you know? So it's not just about creatives, but it's about every home here. Look at the problem. Everyone is sitting at this very same problem. So how can we then instill a great sense of pride by teaching them how to find their smiley heart and then move them to, and using those very same tools then to face whatever challenges and produce different impact. So that became then my narrative, and then because then you start realizing like, ish, there's a need, there's a bigger need than what hits the, because now you're going to the cause of what is the root cause of all of these things that we are seeing, and how are we nipping that in the bud.
And what I'm hearing you say, I think, from my perspective and making it personal to me, I look at, I call, I'm guilty of many things, but a lot of my friends call me an idealist and sometimes a blind optimist,
Sure.
And I don't believe that's necessarily true, but I'm exceptionally optimistic about, things. And I've also been through some pretty hectic experiences in my life, but I wouldn't call myself an idealist. I would call myself a possibilist. And I think because I believe things are possible. And
Sure.
it's a trait that is 100% true of every single entrepreneur that comes into the Heavy Chef community, is that they have a sense of optimism. And the reason why we know that's true is because one would not start a business if one did not have the hope, Thank you, Sharon.
Yes.
The truth is, if we don't have a sense of hope, there's no way you start a business, because it is a blind leap. Reid Hoffman spoke about this idea of starting a business as as jumping off a cliff and building the airplane on the way down, right? Because ultimately we don't know what tomorrow will hold, or next month or next year is going to hold. So we're creating this thing that is, according to every statistic ever measured, likely, the statistics say that there is a strong likelihood that we will fail, right? So why do we do it? It's because we are optimistic that we will be the one that does not fail, right? And I think part of what Heavy Chef's aim is to alleviate some of those odds, to trim them down somewhat. I mean, obviously failure is inevitable, and often we will have many failures before we succeed. And I think it's an important message that you have outlined in this conversation. I think what I want to ask you, and we're coming to the end of this. I mean, I could talk for hours to you, Jesse, because I love your spirit, I love your energy, my man. You're an absolute treat, and I always come away feeling energized when I speak with you. I want to know, how can we create or foster this urgent sense of possibility in our own lives? I mean, our firm belief is that entrepreneurs can change the world for the better. And within the small businesses, within this large community that's growing through Heavy Chef, we're starting to see that impact in small ways, but combined, it can make a big impact. So from an individual's perspective, Jesse, how do we foster this urgent and realistic sense of possibility in our own lives?
I'm reminded of a time when I was really depressed after approaching the big brands with my idea of the South Africanist, and then seeing them flighting it without my consent in putting their budgets behind it, and
I remember
me being a small guy, not having a firepower but I knew who the people were, right? And I approached them, but pretending as if I don't know that they did that. I was like, yo, dudes, did you just see? I've recorded this and this and this. This client did this, that client did that. And then that I was hoping that conversation would tend to oh, dude, let's go fix it. This is wrong, da. But it actually plunged me deeper into my depression. And then I was Then I met this dude who was visiting Cape Town for, I think for, it was celebrating his honeymoon. I mean, celebrating his anniversary. So a fellow artist who was doing graffiti in Woodstock. And then I chatted to him, had a conversation with him, and then I borrowed a can, started painting, but I was not okay. And then he spotted it. And then I told him the thing, right? But it felt like God was speaking to me there. He said, no one can steal your idea. They can only be inspired by you. You know, keep looking for solutions. Keep looking for solutions. So that for me, he started reframed how I look at when things don't go my way or things don't, you know. And but also it also led me to, because there's also a reality of like IP protection. Do you know about IP protection? Do you have a legal friend? Do you know your legal stuff? Do you know your compliance stuff? Do you know all that? So that's what I'm saying, like your vision becomes an educator. So each of those moments, they reveal to you what you didn't know. So it was an awareness, like, oh, I need to know this. I need to know this. I need to know this, right? But then you continue looking for solutions, but also you fixing yourself. Like there's things that, oh, I need to learn this, I need to educate myself about this, I need to back myself up with this and that. So I think that, then the thought of being a possibilist it becomes is you go like, oh, okay, oh, okay, which means then tomorrow I messed up there, okay, let me go do this. So not all is bad or not all is lost, right? You go like, oh, I did this, okay, let me go back and do that. You know, but you keep learning. But remember, I keep saying, have your mentors, people that will walk with you for years. You know, not just a mentor there, and and find yourself. Yeah,
there's definitely a theme throughout this entire conversation. Is that, you know, another trap that we or certainly I can speak to myself, is that I'll get so locked up in my own thoughts that when something bad happens, it feels, you know, I start catastrophizing. So I will, you know, I'll take that thought and it starts to amplify in my mind, and it becomes bigger than it really is. And something that I've learned, and something that I'm hearing, you know, a similar sort of way from you, is not to, by the way, I love the fact that, you know, there is this balance to your message. It's not just all good news. You know, one has to be able to acknowledge the negative stuff, you know, within us and within society, in order to craft an authentic message, one that is true and properly true. Because, you know, there are things like hijackings and personal tragedies that occur. And so if we, you know, walking around the world with this kind of like, you know, this sort of like happy speech bubble above our heads, we become annoying to ourselves as well as everybody around us. And I think there's this thing of time that you know, give something time, and to be able to lean into what is happening, to analyze it, to take perspective of it, to zoom out, to put it on the table, to look at it from all different angles, and identifying it, not shy away from it, and see it for what it really is. Because then, you know, in 10 minutes or 10 hours or 10 days, that lesson will start to, you know, the learning that one can receive from that negative, you know, piece of feedback, or you know, that negative happenstance, that thing that has happened that is not necessarily very nice or positive for us, it can start to reveal itself in the form of some kind of learning that allows us to course correct.
Exactly. And also, and I mean, also when you start acting on decisively, in terms of maybe you are going like, I'm going to stand up against this, I'm saying no to this, this is my value. You also, you're speaking from a sober at heart space, but not from a vindictive or hateful space, but you're justice in a way, you know. So there's justice, right? Versus you being, because then you become this hate, you know, freak. Like you, everywhere you go, you're gonna. So you must free yourself from grudges and bitterness and all of those things, right? But it's then, you know, that when you make a decision, when you say no, it's nothing personal, but it's a very good decision for this, right? And you're able to walk away from as well.
Thank you, Jesse. And like I said, I mean, dude, I love you, brother. I could speak with you for hours, because it's like a gift for me. And I love your message. I love your purpose. I love the work that you do. I particularly love your artwork, dude. It is so good, and it blows my mind that you have never you weren't exposed to some of these, these hyper successful international artists that I think some of your work is as good as, if not better than, some of these guys. And I just look forward to seeing you flourish and your career bloom from here. We've come to the end of the session. Do you have a last word or two of encouragement or perspective for us before we sign off, Jesse?
It's in the form of a question. Are you the reason the world has a smiley heart? Will you be the reason the world has a smiley heart? And for me, that's a driving narrative everywhere I go, and it becomes a question and a conversation that I start with other people. Are you the reason your hood, your dorpi, your kasi, your farm has a smiley heart? So that then it opens a dialogue, it's non-confrontational, but it's not provoking. So it might give you some pearls from different people in whatever space you go into.
I love that. As a conversation starter, that's amazing.
Sure.
Jesse, thank you so much for your time, my man. I really appreciate you, and I see you as a bit of a mentor, and I can see you as a mentor to hundreds of thousands of individuals that you're going to impact through your work and your message. Thank you to everybody in the crew here today, and thank you to everybody who's going to be watching this from the Heavy Chef community for your time to spend on Jesse. I encourage everybody to have a look at Jesse's recipe, which is live right now on the Heavy Chef platform. And just a reminder that we have an in-person event in August that I'd love to see some of you attend. It's going to be fantastic. And I wish everybody an amazing and smiley day going ahead. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.